A pregnant widow was stranded on a frozen mountain trail when a lonely cowboy stopped beside her broken wagon. But what she carried hidden in her hands made him question who she really was. The wagon wheel cracked beneath the Colorado sky as Rebecca Miller pressed one hand against her swollen belly and fought the biting wind. Snow gathered on her worn coat. The horses trembled, and the sound of a distant hoofbeat grew louder through the empty pass. Ethan Walker was only supposed to ride home alone that night, but the stranger on the trail made him stop. What secret was waiting inside her locked case? Stay with us and discover a story of love, courage, and a second chance on the frontier. The first sound Rebecca Miller heard was the wagon wheel breaking, not a slow crack, not a warning she could prepare for. A sharp snap split through the mountain air like a rifle shot. The wagon jerked hard to the left. The old wooden frame groaned beneath her. The mare pulled against the harness, and Rebecca grabbed the edge of the seat with both hands as the whole wagon tilted on the uneven trail. For one terrifying second, she thought she might be thrown clear over the side of the mountain path. Then everything stopped. The dust settled, the wind returned, and Rebecca found herself sitting sideways in the wagon, one hand gripping the seat, the other resting instinctively over the child growing beneath her dress. She stayed still for a moment. Not because she was afraid, because she needed to know if she could move. The San Juan Mountains did not forgive careless decisions. The trail beneath her was narrow, a strip of packed dirt and loose stone winding between dark pine trees and steep rocky slopes. The nearest settlement was still many miles away, and the afternoon light was already beginning to fade behind the mountain peaks. Rebecca slowly climbed down from the wagon. At 34 years old, 8 months pregnant, and traveling alone across Colorado territory, she had learned not to waste energy on panic. Panic did not fix broken wheels. Panic did not calm frightened animals. Panic did not get a person home. She placed one hand against the wagon for balance and lowered herself carefully onto the ground. Her boots sank slightly into the dusty trail. The left rear wheel sat crooked beneath the wagon, the wooden spokes damaged beyond a simple repair. Rebecca stared at it. Then she let out a quiet breath. "Well," she whispered, looking at the broken wheel, "that is certainly inconvenient." The word sounded almost funny. Almost. Her mare, Daisy, shifted nervously in the harness. The old horse had carried her for nearly 2 weeks through mountain roads, cold mornings, and long stretches where there was nothing but wilderness ahead and behind. Rebecca walked over and rubbed the mare's neck. "I know," she said softly. "I'm not thrilled either." Daisy lowered her head. Rebecca looked around. No houses, no smoke from chimneys, no passing wagon, only mountains, the kind of mountains that made a person feel very small. She opened the small toolbox attached to the wagon and pulled out what little she had. A hammer, a few nails, a length of rope, some basic supplies she had bought before leaving the last town. She knew enough about wagons to understand when something could be repaired. This was not one of those times. Still, she tried, because trying was what she knew how to do. For nearly an hour, Rebecca worked beside the wagon. The sun lowered. The wind grew colder. Her gloves became covered in dust, and a strand of brown hair escaped from beneath her bonnet and stuck against her cheek. She ignored it. She tightened the rope, checked the axle, adjusted what she could. Nothing changed. The wagon remained broken. Rebecca finally sat down on a flat stone beside the trail and pressed a hand against her lower back. The child moved gently, a reminder, a question. "Are we all right?" Rebecca closed her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. She had said those words so many times in the last few months that they almost felt like a habit. Yes, we're all right, even when her husband was gone. Even when the bank took the small house they had worked so hard for. Even when she packed her belongings into a wagon and left behind the only town she had ever called home. She had kept moving. That was what people did when life gave them no other choice. Thomas had always said she was stronger than she believed. Rebecca never knew if she believed him, but she knew she had kept going, and she intended to keep going now. She looked toward the road ahead. The small settlement where she planned to start over was still somewhere beyond those mountains. A new place, a new life. That was what she told herself. The truth was more complicated. There was something else in the wagon, something she had protected more carefully than clothing, food, or money. A small locked case wrapped beneath a blanket near the back. Thomas's final work, the one thing she had promised him she would never lose. Rebecca looked toward the wagon. Her expression changed slightly, only for a moment. Then she stood again. She was tired. She was frightened, but she was not finished. The sky changed quickly after that. Mountain weather rarely gave warnings. A dark line of clouds moved over the western peaks, swallowing the last orange light of evening. The temperature dropped, and the wind pushed harder through the trees. Rebecca knew enough about the mountains to understand what was coming. A storm, and soon. She gathered what she could from the wagon, a blanket, a small lantern, the water skin. She considered walking. Then she looked at the trail. Too far. Too dangerous. Not with night coming. She would have to stay with the wagon. So she did what she had done every other time life placed something impossible in front of her. She made a plan. She moved the blanket beneath the wagon for shelter. She tied Daisy securely nearby. She checked the supplies again. Then she sat down and waited. The wind moved through the trees like a distant voice. Rebecca pulled the blanket around her shoulders and stared into the growing darkness. For the first time all day, she allowed herself to admit the thought she had been refusing. She might not make it before morning. The realization settled quietly, not like fear, something heavier, loneliness. She looked up at the mountains. Somewhere beyond them were towns filled with people who would never know her name. Somewhere behind her was the life she had lost. And here, between the two, she sat beside a broken wagon carrying everything she had left. Rebecca lowered her eyes. Then she heard it. A sound. At first, she thought it was the wind. But it came again. A horse, hooves against stone, slow, steady. Someone was coming down the trail. Rebecca stood immediately. The movement was slower than it used to be, but the instinct was still there. She reached for the small knife she kept in her coat pocket. Not because she wanted trouble, because a woman alone on the frontier learned to be prepared. The rider appeared through the trees, a man on a dark gray horse, tall, broad-shouldered, a worn brown coat hanging over his frame, a rifle tied beside his saddle. He looked like every other dangerous possibility she had been warned about, but something about him was different. He was not rushing toward her. He stopped several yards away. The horse stopped first. The rider looked at the broken wagon, then at Rebecca, then back at the wagon. For a moment neither of them spoke. Rebecca watched him carefully. The man looked older than she first expected. Not old, just worn, like someone who had spent years under the same hard sun and carried more than supplies in his saddlebags. His eyes moved over that scene, the broken wheel, the exhausted horse, the pregnant woman standing beside the wagon trying very hard not to look helpless. Rebecca lifted her chin slightly. "Evening," she said. The man removed his hat. "Evening." His voice was calm, low, measured. "Ethan Walker." Rebecca did not lower her guard. "Rebecca Miller." A pause. The man glanced toward the darkening sky. "Storm's coming," I noticed. Something almost like a smile touched his face. "Almost. You've got a broken wheel." I noticed that too. For the first time, something changed in his expression. Not amusement exactly, recognition, like he had expected fear and found something else instead. Ethan looked back down the trail behind him, then ahead, then at her again. Rebecca could see the decision happening. He was considering leaving, and for reasons she did not understand. That bothered her more than if he had simply ridden past without stopping. The horse shifted beneath him. Ethan looked toward the mountains, then at the woman standing beside a broken wagon in the middle of nowhere. A woman who was exhausted. A woman who was clearly afraid, but still standing. He had spent years convincing himself that stopping for other people's troubles only led to pain, that helping meant caring, that caring meant losing something. He knew exactly what happened when you lost something. He had learned that lesson once, and he had no desire to learn it again. So he tightened his hand on the reins. And for one brief second, Rebecca thought he was going to ride away. Then Ethan Walker slowly swung down from the saddle. His boots touched the dirt. "I can take a look at that wheel," he said. Rebecca stared at him. "You don't have to." "No," he said. The wind moved between them. "I reckon I don't." He looked at the approaching storm. "But you shouldn't be sitting out here when it gets dark." Rebecca studied him. The mountain wind pulled at her coat. The broken wagon stood behind her. The stranger stood in front of her. And she had no idea why a man who looked like he had spent years avoiding the world had decided, of all people, to stop for her, but he had. And that was the beginning of everything. Ethan Walker stood beside the broken wagon while the first drops of rain began tapping against the dry ground. Not heavy yet, just enough to leave dark marks in the dust. Rebecca watched him kneel beside the damaged wheel, his movements calm and deliberate. He did not rush. He did not make a show of being helpful. He simply looked at the problem in front of him and started figuring out what could be done. That alone caught her attention. Most men she had met since becoming a widow were quick to tell her what she should do. They told her where she should go, what she could not handle, what was too difficult for a woman in her condition. Ethan Walker did none of those things. He picked up a broken piece of wood from the wheel and studied it. "Looks like this wagon has been carrying more than it was built for," he said. Rebecca crossed her arms carefully. "I suppose that is one way to say it." He looked up. There was no offense in his face, just curiosity. "You disagree?" "I have been told that many times," she said, "usually by men who were not offering to help repair it." For a moment, Ethan said nothing. Then he nodded slightly. Fair enough, that was all. No argument, no attempt to prove her wrong. Rebecca noticed. A man who did not rush to defend himself was unusual. Ethan stood and walked back to his horse. "Have rope, a few tools, and some extra canvas in my saddlebags. We can secure what we can and get you somewhere dry before nightfall." "We?" He glanced at her. "Yes." Rebecca looked toward the trail. The storm clouds were moving faster now. The mountains had turned a dark shade of blue-gray, and the wind had become colder. She knew the truth. She had few choices, but accepting help from a stranger still felt like stepping onto unstable ground. "What do you expect in return, Mr. Walker?" The question hung between them. Ethan stopped. Not because he was angry, because he understood why she asked. "My expectation, yes." He looked toward the broken wagon, then back at her. "That you get through the storm without freezing beside a broken wheel." Rebecca studied his face. She searched for the hidden meaning, the condition, the part where kindness became something she owed. She found nothing. That is all. That is all. The wind moved through the pine trees around them. Finally, Rebecca nodded. "All right," Ethan returned to the wagon. They worked together, not quickly, not dramatically, just steadily. Rebecca held the lantern while Ethan secured the damaged wheel enough to keep the wagon from collapsing completely. He adjusted the ropes around the axle and checked the harness twice before leading Daisy toward his horse. "You know," Rebecca said after a while, "most men would have already told me I should have never attempted this trip alone." Ethan tightened a knot. "Should you have?" The question surprised her. She looked at him. Most men would have answered for her. Instead, he asked. Rebecca looked away toward the mountains. "Maybe not." A small pause. "But I had no one else." Ethan's hands slowed for just a moment. Then he continued working. I understand that. Something about the way he said it made her believe him. Not because he explained, because he did not. The rain began falling harder. Ethan looked toward the sky. We need to move. Rebecca glanced at the wagon. What about my things? What matters? The question was simple, but she knew exactly what he meant. She looked toward the back of the wagon, her belongings, the few dresses she owned, her husband's old books, the small locked case beneath the blanket. Everything that remained of the life she had lost. All of it, she said. Ethan looked at her for a moment, not judging, not questioning. All right. He helped her gather what could be moved quickly, a small bag of clothing, a wrapped bundle of papers, a wooden box of kitchen supplies, and the blanket-covered case. Rebecca noticed that Ethan did not ask about it. Not once. He saw her keep checking that it was still there. He saw the way her hand rested on it whenever she passed by. But he respected the silence. That mattered more than she expected. When everything was secured, Ethan brought his horse closer. My ranch is about 2 hours from here. Rebecca looked at the horse, then at him. You expect me to ride? No. His answer came immediately. You ride with me. Her eyebrows lifted. I hardly know you. That is true. And you think that is a good idea? No. For the first time, there was the smallest hint of humor in his voice. I think it is the only one we have. Rebecca almost smiled. Almost. Instead, she looked toward the storm. You always this agreeable? No. What are you usually like? Ethan considered that. Quiet, I noticed. I figured. That almost made her laugh. Almost. Together, they arranged the safest way for her to ride. Ethan helped her onto the saddle behind him. Careful and respectful. He kept his hands where they needed to be and nowhere else. Rebecca noticed that too. He treated her like a person, not a problem, not a burden, a person. Once she was settled, Ethan mounted in front of her. Hold on. I know how to ride, I figured. The answer was so similar to hers that she looked at the back of his shoulder. You enjoy repeating yourself? No, you are very convincing. I try. This time she did smile, small, brief, but Ethan saw it. He did not mention it. He simply turned the horse toward the trail. The ride through the mountains was slow. The rain made the path slick, and the wind pushed cold air through the trees. Ethan guided the horse carefully around loose rocks and steep turns. Rebecca remained quiet behind him, not because she was uncomfortable, because she was watching. She watched how he checked the trail before every turn, how he slowed whenever the ground became uneven, how he looked back every few minutes to make sure Daisy was following. A man who paid attention. That was what he was. After an hour, Ethan spoke. You heading to town? Rebecca hesitated. A settlement near Durango, that is a long way. I know. Family there? Another pause. No, Ethan did not ask more. Again, she noticed. You do not ask many questions. No. Why? He looked ahead. People usually tell you what they want you to know when they are ready. The answer stayed with her, because it was true. Rebecca looked down at her hands. Most people wanted explanations. Ethan seemed willing to wait. The storm followed them until they reached the lower trail near his ranch. The clouds finally began breaking apart, leaving streaks of pale evening light across the mountains. Then Rebecca saw it, a small ranch tucked between the trees, a wooden fence, a barn, a simple house with smoke rising from the chimney. Nothing grand, nothing impressive, but it looked cared for, like someone had spent years keeping it standing. Ethan slowed the horse. We're here. Rebecca looked at the ranch, then at the man who had stopped on a mountain trail when he could have kept riding. She still did not know him. She still did not fully trust him. But she knew one thing. She was no longer alone in the storm. Ethan helped her down from the horse. The moment her boots touched the ground, she placed a hand against her back and took a slow breath. You all right? Yes. A pause. Then she added honestly, I will be. Ethan nodded. He seemed to understand the difference. He opened the ranch gate and led the horses inside. Rebecca followed slowly. She noticed the quiet first. Not the peaceful kind, the empty kind. The kind of silence that belonged to a place where someone had been alone for a very long time. The house door opened. Warm air escaped. A small fire burned in the stove. There was a table, 2 chairs, a shelf of books. Everything clean, everything organized. But somehow, it felt like someone had stopped living there years ago. Rebecca stepped inside, and Ethan Walker, the man who had spent years keeping everyone at a distance, watched a stranger walk into his home and realized something he did not expect. The house did not feel quite as empty as it had an hour before. He noticed it before he even understood why. The sound of another person's footsteps, the movement of someone setting down a bag near the door, the quiet rustle of a coat being removed. For years, Ethan had become used to the sounds of his ranch, the creaking floorboards, the fire settling in the stove, the wind pressing against the windows at night, the occasional call of cattle from the pasture. Those sounds had become familiar, predictable, safe. Now there was another sound mixed in. Rebecca Miller breathing in the corner of his kitchen. And for reasons he could not explain, that bothered him less than he expected. There's a room in the back, Ethan said, placing another piece of wood into the stove. It stays warmer than the others. Rebecca looked toward the hallway. I hope I am not putting you out. You're not. She glanced at him. The answer came too quickly, like he had already decided. Rebecca noticed things. That was one of the reasons Thomas had always trusted her judgment. She noticed the small details other people missed, the way a person held their shoulders, the way they avoided certain subjects, the way a simple answer could reveal more than a long explanation. Ethan Walker was a man who answered questions directly, but he was also a man who carried silence like it belonged to him. She followed him down the short hallway. The room was simple, a bed, a small wooden table, a wash basin, a folded quilt at the end of the mattress. Nothing fancy, but everything was clean. Rebecca placed her bag beside the bed. Thank you, Ethan nodded. You should rest. I have been resting quite a lot lately. That doesn't look like rest. The words were quiet, not critical, just honest. Rebecca looked at him for a moment. Then she glanced down at her stomach. I suppose you are right. A pause. Mr. Walker, Ethan, she hesitated, then nodded. Ethan. The name sounded unfamiliar, not unpleasant. I appreciate what you did today. He looked away slightly. You needed help. Yes, Rebecca folded her hands together. But not everyone notices when someone needs help. For a second, Ethan said nothing. Then he gave a small nod and walked away before the conversation could become something deeper. Rebecca watched him leave. A strange man. A quiet man. A man who seemed more comfortable repairing broken fences than accepting thanks. She smiled faintly to herself. Then she closed the door. The next morning arrived cold and clear. Rebecca woke before sunrise. Years of farm life had trained her body to rise early, even when there was no reason to hurry. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then she heard the unfamiliar sounds. A rooster somewhere near the barn. Boots moving across the porch. The low sound of a gate opening. She sat up slowly. Her body reminded her immediately that yesterday had been a long day. She placed both feet on the floor and took her time standing. When she entered the kitchen, Ethan was already there. A pot of coffee sat on the stove. 2 cups rested on the table. Rebecca stopped. You made coffee? Ethan looked up from the piece of leather he was repairing. Yes, for me? He looked at the second cup, then back at her. I assumed you drank coffee. Rebecca walked toward the table. You assumed correctly. She sat down. The coffee was strong, a little bitter. Exactly what she needed. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. And somehow, the silence did not feel uncomfortable. That surprised Rebecca. Most silences with strangers felt like a wall. This felt more like a doorway. After breakfast, Ethan went outside to repair the wagon. Rebecca watched him from the porch. He worked the same way he spoke, quietly, carefully. He checked every piece before replacing it. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was rushed. She eventually walked down toward the barn. "You always fix your own equipment." Ethan looked over his shoulder. "Most of the time." "Why?" "Because I know how it was done." Rebecca looked at the tools hanging neatly on the wall. "That sounds like something my husband would say." Ethan paused. Not long, just enough for her to notice. "Your husband?" Rebecca nodded. "Thomas." She looked toward the mountains. He was the kind of man who read instructions before opening the box. A small smile appeared. He would spend an hour planning something that took 10 minutes to complete. Ethan looked at the wagon wheel. Sounds frustrating. It was a pause, sometimes. The corner of her mouth lifted. But he was usually right. Ethan returned to his work. Usually, almost always. That earned the smallest change in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. Rebecca noticed. She said nothing. Over the next few days, the ranch slowly changed. Not because Rebecca tried to change it. She did not. She understood the difference between helping and taking over. Instead, she simply lived. She cooked meals because she was hungry. She folded blankets because they were sitting in a pile. She organized the pantry because she could not stand watching cans and supplies sit in no order. Ethan noticed. Of course he noticed. One afternoon, he came inside after checking the cattle and found the kitchen shelves arranged neatly. The flour containers labeled, the dried beans stored properly. The coffee moved closer to the stove. He stood in the doorway. Rebecca looked up from the table. "What?" He looked around. "You moved things." "Yes, why?" "Because they made more sense this way." Ethan looked at the shelves, then back at her. "I knew where everything was. You knew where everything was because you remembered where you put it." "That seems useful." "It is." She folded a cloth, but useful and organized are not always the same thing. For a moment, Ethan looked like he wanted to disagree. Then he looked back at the shelves and decided not to. Rebecca noticed that too. He listened. That was rare. 3 days passed before the rain finally stopped. The mountains cleared, the roads began drying. Ethan continued repairing her wagon, Rebecca continued preparing to leave. But neither of them seemed in much of a hurry, not because they had forgotten, because something about the ranch had become easier. One evening, Rebecca sat near the fireplace reading one of the books from Ethan's shelf. A small wooden toy sat beside the books, a carved horse, simple, handmade. She picked it up carefully. When Ethan entered the room, he stopped. Rebecca immediately placed it back. "I am sorry." His eyes moved to the toy, then away. "You don't have to apologize. I did not mean to touch something personal." Another silence. Ethan walked over and picked up the toy. "My daughter made me keep it." Rebecca looked at him. The words were simple, but the room changed. "You have a daughter?" "Had." The word never came. He didn't need to say it. Rebecca understood. "I'm sorry." Ethan looked at the toy in his hand. "My wife and daughter are gone." The fire cracked softly. Rebecca did not ask what happened. She wanted to, but she didn't. Instead, she said, "I know what it is like to have a person missing from a room." Ethan looked at her, not surprised, just listening. And for a few moments, two people who had both lost pieces of their lives sat in the same quiet room. Neither tried to fix the other. Neither offered easy words. They simply understood. Outside, the wind moved across the Colorado mountains. Inside, the fire burned lower, and Ethan Walker realized something he had not expected. Rebecca Miller was not bringing noise into his home. She was bringing life, but neither of them knew yet that the quiet days at the ranch were only the beginning. Because hidden beneath the blanket she guarded so carefully was a secret that would soon turn Ethan's peaceful mountain life upside down. For nearly a week, the ranch settled into a rhythm neither of them had expected. The mornings began with coffee before sunrise. The afternoons carried the sounds of hammering from the barn as Ethan continued repairing Rebecca's wagon. The evenings ended with the fire burning low while they sat across from each other, sometimes talking, sometimes saying nothing at all. It was strange how quickly a person could become familiar. Rebecca still knew very little about Ethan Walker. She knew he owned a small cattle ranch. She knew he preferred working with animals over talking to people. She knew he kept his tools arranged in perfect order and his coffee strong enough to make a person forget they had ever slept. But there were still pieces of him hidden away, like the closed door at the end of the hallway, like the old wooden toy on the shelf, like the way he sometimes stopped when he passed the empty bedroom. Rebecca noticed. She simply respected that some doors stayed closed until someone was ready to open them. Ethan respected things too. He did not ask about the locked case, not even once. That bothered Rebecca more than if he had asked. Most people were curious, especially when they saw a widow traveling alone with a small case she guarded more carefully than her own belongings. Ethan only noticed. He did not demand. That made it harder to keep pretending the secret did not exist. The morning the storm finally cleared, Ethan brought the repaired wagon around to the front of the house. Rebecca stepped onto the porch and looked at it. "You fixed it," Ethan nodded. "It will hold." She walked closer, examining the wheel. "You replaced more than you repaired. The wood was too damaged." "I know." She looked at him. "You did extra work." Ethan shrugged. "It needed doing." Rebecca smiled slightly. "That seems to be your answer for everything. It usually works." She wanted to laugh. Instead, she looked down at the wagon. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Because both understood what the repaired wagon meant, she could leave now. The reason she had come to the ranch was ending. The storm had passed, the road was open, the wagon was ready, but neither of them moved toward goodbye. Finally, Ethan cleared his throat. "You should not travel today." Rebecca looked at him. "Why? Your horse needs another day." She glanced toward Daisy, who was standing near the barn enjoying a fresh bucket of water. "She looks better." "She is," a pause, "but the mountain roads are still soft from the rain." Rebecca studied him. "You are asking me to stay?" Ethan looked away toward the pasture. "I am saying it would be safer." The answer was very Ethan, not a request, not an order, just a fact. Rebecca looked at the mountains, then at the ranch, then back at him. "One more day." Ethan nodded once. "Good, that was all." But it felt like more. That afternoon, Rebecca was sorting through her belongings, a few dresses, some letters, Thomas's old journal, the small locked case. She kept the case wrapped beneath a folded blanket inside her trunk. She had moved it carefully every night. Always close. Always within reach. Ethan entered the room carrying a repaired strap from her luggage. "I fixed this." Rebecca looked up. "You did not have to, I know." She smiled faintly. "You really do have only 3 answers." He handed her the strap. It was loose. She took it. "Thank you." Ethan nodded and turned to leave. Then he stopped, only for a second. His eyes moved toward the blanket-covered case. Rebecca noticed. The room became quiet. Not uncomfortable, just honest. "You can ask," she said. Ethan looked back at her. "Ask what?" Rebecca gave him a look, the kind that told him she knew exactly what he was doing. He stood there for a moment. Then he sighed quietly. "What is in the case?" There it was, the question. Rebecca looked down at the case. Her hand rested on the blanket. "My husband's work." Ethan did not move. Thomas was a land clerk, I remember. He worked with property records, deeds, ownership papers, survey reports. She paused. He was very good at finding mistakes. Ethan leaned against the doorframe, and he found something. Rebecca looked toward the window. The mountains outside were covered in late afternoon sunlight, something he was not supposed to find. The words changed the room. Ethan straightened slightly. What happened? Rebecca was quiet. For several seconds, she only looked at the floor, then she sat down. Before Thomas died, he was investigating land claims around southern Colorado. Ethan listened. He noticed families were losing property they legally owned. The paperwork looked correct, but something was wrong. What kind of wrong? Records changed, boundaries moved, names disappeared. Ethan's expression hardened slightly. Someone was stealing land. Rebecca nodded. That was what Thomas believed. She reached toward the case, but believing something and proving it are different things. Ethan looked at the lock. You have proof. Rebecca did not answer immediately. That was answer enough. The next few minutes were quiet. Then Rebecca unlocked the case. The small metal click sounded louder than it should have. Inside were carefully folded documents, letters, maps, receipts, a leather-bound notebook filled with Thomas's handwriting. Ethan stepped closer, not because he wanted to invade her privacy, because he understood the seriousness of what he was seeing. Rebecca lifted one of the maps. Thomas spent months comparing records. She pointed to several marked areas. These families were told they bought one piece of land. The official records showed another. Ethan studied the markings. Who was behind it? Rebecca looked at him. Harold Whitaker. The name meant something. Ethan's face changed slightly. You know him? Everyone in this territory knows him. Ethan looked back at the papers. Whitaker was one of the wealthiest cattle owners in Colorado. A man who donated money to churches. A man who shook hands with judges. A man whose name appeared in newspapers whenever something needed celebrating. Rebecca lowered her voice. Thomas said men like Whitaker did not build their fortunes by accident. Ethan picked up one of the documents. Why bring this with you? Because Thomas was going to take it to someone who could investigate. And then? Rebecca's fingers tightened slightly. Then he got sick. The room became still. He died before he could finish. Ethan looked at her. And you decided to finish it. Rebecca met his eyes. Yes. No hesitation, no apology, just yes. That evening, Ethan sat alone on the porch after Rebecca went inside. The mountains were quiet, the kind of quiet that usually comforted him. But tonight, it felt different. He thought about the broken wagon, the woman standing beside it, the locked case, the powerful man whose name had changed the air in the room. Something had brought Rebecca to his trail, and now something dangerous had followed her there. Inside the house, Rebecca stood beside the window. She looked out at Ethan sitting alone, a man who had lost everything, a man who had offered help without asking for anything, a man who now knew enough to understand the risk. She wondered if she had brought trouble to the one place where she had finally felt safe. The thought stayed with her until the next morning. When Ethan returned from checking the southern fence line with a look on his face she had not seen before. Not anger, not fear, something colder. He removed his gloves slowly. Rebecca. She looked up. What happened? Ethan placed a folded piece of paper on the table. A man in town was asking questions. Her heart tightened. About me, Ethan nodded. About a widow traveling alone. The room went silent. Rebecca looked toward the locked case, then back at Ethan. The quiet days at the ranch were over, because someone else now knew she had survived the mountain trail, and sooner or later, they would come looking for what she carried. The thought followed Rebecca through the entire morning. She tried not to let it show. That was something she had become good at. When Thomas was sick, She learned how to keep her voice calm even when her hands shook. When the bank officer came to the house with papers she did not want to sign, she learned how to listen without showing fear. When she left town with a wagon full of memories and a secret hidden beneath a blanket, she learned how to keep moving. But Ethan noticed. He noticed everything. That was becoming both a comfort and a problem. "You have not touched your coffee," he said. Rebecca looked down. The mug sat beside her, untouched. "I suppose I was distracted." Ethan sat across from her at the kitchen table. By the man asking questions, Rebecca looked up. Yes, the answer was honest. Ethan respected that. "Tell me exactly what happened." Rebecca folded her hands together. "I went into town yesterday afternoon." "You did not tell me." "I only went for supplies." Ethan's expression changed slightly. Not anger, concern. "You should have told me." Rebecca looked at him. "I did not realize I needed permission." The words were sharper than she intended. The room went quiet. Ethan leaned back slightly. "You don't." The answer came immediately. "I am not asking you to ask permission." Rebecca held his gaze. "Then what are you asking?" Ethan looked toward the window. The ranch stretched beyond it. The fences, the fields, the mountain line in the distance. "I'm asking you not to carry everything alone." The words landed differently than she expected. Rebecca looked away first, because she understood that feeling. She had spent months carrying everything alone. And now there was a man sitting across from her who seemed to understand the weight of that better than most. Still, accepting help was harder than needing it. "I saw a man outside the general store," she said quietly. "Describe him." "Tall, gray coat, expensive boots. He was not from the area." "What did he say?" "Nothing directly." Ethan waited. Rebecca continued. "He asked the store owner if a pregnant widow had passed through recently." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Did the store owner answer?" "He said he did not know." "That is good." Rebecca looked at him. "You sound surprised. I know people." A pause. "Some people talk because they want to, and others talk because they are afraid." Rebecca looked down at her coffee. "You think this man was sent by Whitaker?" Ethan did not answer right away. That was answer enough. By noon, Ethan had made a decision. "We need to leave." Rebecca looked up from the table. "Leave for a few days." "Where?" "Town." She frowned. "That seems like the opposite of hiding. It is not about hiding." He walked toward the cabinet where he kept his papers. "It is about finding out what we are dealing with." Rebecca watched him. "What changed?" Ethan stopped. She knew him well enough now to see when he was choosing his words. "You told me Whitaker was powerful." "Yes." "You told me he had money, influence, and people willing to protect him." "Yes." He turned toward her. "And now I know he is looking for you." A silence passed between them. Rebecca lowered her voice. "Ethan, I do not want you involved." The words surprised him, not because she said them, because she meant them. "You think I am involved because you stayed here?" "Yes." "That is not how it works." Rebecca looked at him. "He is dangerous. So are the mountains." "That is different." "Is it?" She did not answer. Ethan walked closer, but stopped several feet away. He never crowded her. Another thing she had noticed. "I stopped because you were stranded on a trail." Rebecca looked at him. "I know. I helped because you needed help." "I know." He paused. "But I am not helping because I feel sorry for you." Those words mattered. Rebecca looked down, because that was exactly what she feared. Pity. People had offered her pity before. They saw a widow, a pregnant woman, a person who had lost everything. They rarely saw the person underneath. Ethan continued. "I am helping because you are Rebecca Miller." The room became very still, and you are standing in my kitchen asking me to let you face this alone. Rebecca swallowed. She looked away. Not because she disagreed, because she did not know what to do with someone choosing to stand beside her. They rode into town the following morning. The road from Ethan's ranch to the nearest settlement was rough from the storm. The wagon wheels rolled slowly over muddy patches, and the mountain air carried the smell of wet earth and pine. Rebecca sat beside Ethan on the wagon seat, not behind him, beside him. She noticed the difference. He had made room for her without saying anything. That was how Ethan did things. Quietly, the town was small. A few wooden buildings, a blacksmith shop, a general store, a diner where ranch hands gathered after long days. Nothing about it suggested danger. That was what made it unsettling. Danger rarely announced itself. Ethan parked near the general store. "Stay close." Rebecca looked at him. "There it is again." "What?" "The way you say things like they are simple facts. Usually they are." She shook her head slightly. For a moment, Ethan almost smiled. Inside the store, the owner recognized Ethan immediately. "Walker Tom," the older man glanced at Rebecca, then back at Ethan. "Friend of yours?" Ethan looked at Rebecca. The question was simple, but something about it mattered. Rebecca noticed. Ethan could have answered many ways: a stranger, someone I helped, a woman passing through. Instead, he said, "She is staying with me." The words were not romantic. They were not a declaration, but they carried weight. The store owner nodded slowly. "Then she is welcome." Rebecca looked at Ethan. He did not notice. Or maybe he pretended not to. They bought supplies: flour, coffee, a few canned goods, medicine Rebecca wanted for the journey ahead. The store owner wrote everything down carefully in the ledger. Then, as they were leaving, he lowered his voice. "Ethan." Ethan stopped. "What?" The older man glanced toward the street. "That fellow you mentioned?" Ethan's face changed. "What fellow? The one asking questions." Rebecca froze. The store owner continued. "He was here yesterday morning." Ethan looked at him. "What did he ask?" The man hesitated. "Wanted to know if anyone had seen a woman traveling alone." Rebecca felt a chill despite the warm sunlight. "Did he give a name?" The store owner shook his head. "No." A pause. "But he did mention one thing." "What?" The man looked toward Rebecca. "He said he was looking for something that belonged to a man who was dead." The world seemed quieter for a moment. Rebecca's fingers tightened around the small bag in her hand. Ethan saw. He did not ask. He simply stepped slightly closer. A small movement, but enough. They left town before sunset. Neither spoke much on the ride back. The mountains rose around them, beautiful, silent, unaware. When they reached the ranch, Ethan secured the horses and checked the gate twice. Rebecca watched him. "You think he will come here?" Ethan looked toward the road. "I think he already knows enough to try." Her face tightened. "What if he hurts you because of me?" Ethan turned. The question stayed between them. Then he walked toward the house. "Rebecca." She looked at him. "You have spent a long time believing you are a burden." She went still. "You are not." The words were quiet, certain. Before she could answer, Ethan looked toward the northern ridge. A rider stood there, far away, watching, then gone. Rebecca saw it too, and in that moment, both of them understood. The broken wagon had not been bad luck. The stranger in town had not been curiosity. Someone had been searching. And now they knew exactly where to look. For the first time in years, Ethan Walker looked at his own ranch and saw it differently. Not as a place of safety, not as a place where he could disappear, but as a place that could be taken from him. The thought bothered him more than he expected, not because of the land, not because of the cattle. The ranch had always been enough to keep him busy, but it had never truly been home again after the winter that took his wife and daughter. The empty rooms had stayed empty. The old wooden toy on the shelf had stayed covered in dust. The second chair at the kitchen table had remained untouched until Rebecca Miller arrived. Now there was a woman sleeping under his roof who was carrying a danger she never asked for. And somehow Ethan found himself more worried about the sound of her footsteps in the hallway than the footsteps of any man coming up the mountain road. He did not like that, because caring about someone meant giving the world another way to hurt him, and Ethan Walker had spent years making sure that never happened again. The next morning came cold and gray. A thin layer of frost covered the fence posts, and the mountains disappeared behind a curtain of low clouds. Ethan stood near the barn, tightening the saddle straps on his horse. Rebecca watched from the porch. "Porch, you are leaving." It was not a question. Ethan looked up. "Only for a few hours, to check the northern fence?" He nodded. "You remembered." Rebecca folded her arms. "You have mentioned that fence every morning since I arrived." A small silence passed. Then Ethan looked away. "That's so?" "Yes." There was the smallest hint of amusement in her voice. It surprised him. He had forgotten what it sounded like when someone teased him without trying to hurt him. Rebecca stepped down from the porch carefully, one hand resting against the railing. "I can help." "No," the answer came too quickly. Her eyebrows lifted. "I was offering to repair a fence, not climb a mountain." Ethan looked at her, then at the swollen belly she carried, then back at her. A quiet moment passed. "I know," his voice softened. "I just meant you should rest." Rebecca studied him. "You do realize I am still a person, don't you?" Ethan frowned slightly. "What? Everyone keeps looking at me like I might break. I am not." "You are," she said it calmly, not accusing, just honest. Ethan had no answer, because maybe she was right. He had seen the weight of the world she carried and forgotten. She was also the woman who fixed her own wagon on a mountain trail, the woman who crossed miles alone, the woman who protected papers that powerful men wanted destroyed. Rebecca gave him a small smile. "I appreciate that you worry." A pause. "But I do not want to disappear just because someone decided I was inconvenient." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "All right." It was not an apology, but it was close, and Rebecca noticed. That afternoon, Ethan returned later than expected. The sun was already lowering behind the mountains. Rebecca was standing near the barn when she heard the horse. She expected Ethan, but the moment he rode into view, she saw something was wrong. Not with him, with the horse. The animal was breathing heavily. Ethan climbed down slowly. "What happened?" Rebecca walked closer. "A loose section of fence." She looked at him. "That took all day?" Ethan did not answer. That was when she saw the small piece of paper in his hand. "What is that?" Ethan looked down. "I found it near the fence post." Rebecca stepped closer. He handed it to her. It was not much, just a torn scrap. But there was writing on it, a name, Miller. Rebecca's face changed, not dramatically, just enough for Ethan to see. That was not there by accident. She held the paper carefully. "My husband kept notes about Whitaker." She nodded. "He was careful. He never wrote everything in one place." Why? Because he knew someone might find it. The wind moved through the trees. Ethan looked toward the mountains. Someone had come close, closer than either of them realized. That night, Rebecca could not sleep. The ranch was quiet, too quiet. She sat near the window in the guest room, holding the small locked case in her lap. Inside were papers that had changed everything. Her husband's work, his final months, his final attempt to protect families who had no power against men like Harold Whitaker. She touched the edge of the case. "I wish you were here," she whispered. The words left her before she could stop them. Not because she wanted to go back, but because grief did not disappear just because life moved forward. A soft knock came at the door. Rebecca quickly wiped her face. "Come in." Ethan stood there. He did not enter immediately. "I heard you moving." Rebecca looked down. I could not sleep. He nodded. Neither spoke. Then Ethan walked to the small table and placed something down. A cup. Coffee? Rebecca looked at it. At this hour? I know. A pause. I thought you might want it. She looked at him. A small smile appeared. You are not very good at comforting people, are you? No. The honesty almost made her laugh. Almost. Ethan looked at the floor. My wife used to say I had a habit of trying to fix things that could not be fixed. Rebecca became still. He rarely spoke about her. I am sorry. He nodded. Her name was Clara. The room remained quiet. And my daughter was Lily. Rebecca waited. She did not interrupt. That was something Ethan appreciated. Winter storm, 2 words, but they carried years. I found their wagon 3 days later. Rebecca lowered her eyes. She understood. Not every wound needed a story. Some wounds were too deep for many words. Ethan looked at the wooden floor. After that, I decided being alone was easier. Rebecca held the coffee cup in both hands. And was it? He looked at her. The question stayed between them. Outside, the wind moved against the windows. Finally, Ethan answered. No, it was barely louder than a whisper, but it was the truth. The following morning, Ethan prepared the wagon. They needed to go to town, not because they were running, because they needed answers. Rebecca packed the locked case herself. She checked it twice. Then a third time. Ethan noticed. You trust that box more than you trust me. Rebecca looked at him. A small smile touched her face. I have known the box longer. For a moment, Ethan almost smiled. Almost. They rode together toward the settlement. The road was narrow, winding through the mountain pass. The air was colder than usual. Rebecca pulled her shawl tighter. Without saying anything, Ethan removed his coat and placed it over her shoulders. She looked at him. You will be cold. I am used to it. So am I. He looked at her. You should not have to be. Rebecca held his gaze. Neither spoke. The wagon continued forward, but something between them had shifted. Not suddenly, not like a storm. More like the first light of morning spreading across the mountains. Slow, quiet, impossible to stop. And neither of them noticed the rider watching from the distant ridge, the same man who had been asking questions. The same man who now knew Ethan Walker was no longer just protecting a stranger. He was protecting Rebecca Miller. And that made him a problem. The thought followed Harold Whitaker's men all the way back to the small mining town of Silver Creek. They had searched the wagon trails. They had questioned shopkeepers. They had offered coins to anyone willing to share a name or a direction. And every answer seemed to lead them closer to one man. Ethan Walker, a quiet rancher who kept to himself, a man who had never cared about town gossip or other people's disputes until now. That bothered them, because men like Whitaker understood greed, they understood fear, but loyalty was harder to control. The ride to Silver Creek took most of the day. The road was rough, with patches of loose stone that made the wagon wheels shake. Rebecca held the side rail with one hand, while keeping the locked case close with the other. Ethan noticed. You can put it under the seat. She looked down at the case. No. He glanced at her. You have carried it for weeks, yes, and you still do not trust leaving it 3 feet away. Rebecca looked ahead at the mountain road. It belonged to my husband. That was all she said. Ethan did not ask again. He understood something about carrying things that others could not see. Some burdens were not heavy because of what they weighed. They were heavy because of what they meant. Silver Creek was a busy little settlement built between the mountains and the old mining roads. Horse-drawn wagons moved through the muddy streets. A blacksmith's hammer rang from across town. The smell of coffee and fresh bread drifted from the diner near the general store. For Rebecca, it was the first time in days she had seen more than trees and mountain trails. But Ethan noticed something else. The way people looked at them. Not everyone. Just enough. A pregnant widow traveling with a rancher attracted attention. Rebecca noticed too. She straightened her coat and lifted her chin. Ethan saw the movement. "You all right?" She looked at him. "I am tired of people deciding my story before I speak." He nodded slowly. "So am I." Rebecca looked surprised, because she realized he was not talking about her. He was talking about himself. They found Samuel Carter in a small office behind the county records building. He was not what Rebecca expected. She had imagined a stern government man who would immediately demand proof. Instead, Samuel Carter was sitting behind a desk covered with papers, wearing a worn brown jacket and reading glasses that sat low on his nose. When Ethan introduced them, Carter stood. "Mrs. Miller." Rebecca held herself carefully. "Mr. Carter," he looked at Ethan. "You brought her here yourself?" "Yes." Carter studied him for a moment. Then he looked back at Rebecca. "That tells me something." Rebecca's expression hardened slightly. "Does it?" "Yes." He paused. "You are either very brave or very foolish." For the first time in days, Rebecca almost smiled. "I have been called both." Carter motioned toward the chairs. "Then we may already understand each other." Rebecca placed the locked case on the desk. Her hands remained on top of it. She did not let go immediately. Carter noticed. He did not rush her. Finally, she opened it. Inside were letters, land records, handwritten notes, maps with markings along different properties. Carter picked up one document carefully. He read in silence, then another and another. The room became still. Ethan watched his expression change. Not fear, not confusion, recognition. "What is it?" Ethan asked. Carter placed the paper down. "Your husband was telling the truth." Rebecca lowered her eyes. A breath left her. Not relief, not yet. Because truth did not bring back the person who had died trying to reveal it. "What did he find?" she asked. Carter leaned back. "Harold Whitaker has been using false claims and altered records to take land from small ranchers and settlers." Ethan frowned. "Whitaker owns half the valley." "Exactly." Carter tapped the papers. "That is why he wanted this buried." Rebecca looked at the documents. "My husband knew." "Yes, and he still kept working." Carter nodded. He believed someone had to. The room went quiet. Ethan looked at Rebecca. She did not cry. She did not break. She simply placed one hand over the papers, the same way she had protected them since the day she left. Carter spent the next hour reviewing every detail. The more he read, the deeper his concern became. "There is something else." Rebecca looked up. "What?" Carter removed another document from the case. "This name." He pointed to the bottom of the page. Rebecca leaned closer. "I do not know it. Your husband worked with someone." "Who?" "Benjamin Ross." Ethan looked at Carter. "Where is he?" Carter's expression changed. "That is the problem." Rebecca waited. "He disappeared." The words hung in the room. "When?" "About 6 months before Thomas died." Rebecca looked confused. "My husband never told me. Maybe he was trying to protect you." She looked away. That possibility hurt more than she expected, because suddenly Thomas's final months were filled with things she never knew. Secrets, warnings, pieces of a battle he fought alone. Later that afternoon, Ethan and Rebecca sat outside the diner. 2 cups of coffee cooled between them. The town moved around them. People carried supplies. Children ran through the street. A wagon rolled past with sacks of flour in the back. But at their table, everything felt quiet. Rebecca stared into her cup. "I thought I knew my husband." Ethan leaned back. "You did?" She shook her head. "Did I?" A long pause. "Maybe I only knew the parts he was able to show me." Ethan looked at the mountains beyond town. My wife did that." Rebecca turned toward him. "She hid things?" He nodded. "She knew the winter was going to be bad. She wanted to sell the northern pasture before it became too dangerous." He looked down. "I told her I could handle it." His fingers tightened around the coffee mug. I thought protecting my family meant making every decision myself. Rebecca was quiet. Then she said softly, "Sometimes people hide things because they are afraid the truth will hurt someone they love." Ethan looked at her. For a moment, neither spoke, because both understood what the other was really saying. They returned to Carter's office before sunset. The investigator had one more piece of information. "One of Whitaker's men was seen near your ranch." Ethan's face changed. Rebecca noticed. "What does that mean?" Carter looked between them. "It means Whitaker knows the evidence survived." The room became colder. "Then he knows where I am," Rebecca said. Carter nodded. "And now he knows who is standing beside you." Outside, a horse moved past the window, slow, controlled. Ethan noticed. His hand rested near the edge of the table, not reaching for a weapon, not making a scene, just ready, because the man who once believed distance kept him safe had learned something different. Sometimes danger came whether you opened the door or not. And sometimes the only choice left was deciding who you were willing to stand beside. As they left the office, Ethan looked toward the mountain road, the same road that had brought Rebecca into his life, the same road that had brought trouble with her. And somewhere beyond those hills, Harold Whitaker was already making his next move. By the time Ethan and Rebecca returned to the Walker Ranch, the sun had already disappeared behind the mountain peaks. The last orange light stretched across the valley, touching the tops of the pine trees before fading into the cold blue of evening. Neither of them spoke much during the ride home. There were too many thoughts, too many questions. The quiet between them was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence shared by people who had seen the same storm coming and understood there was no way around it. When they reached the ranch gate, Ethan stopped the wagon. Something was wrong. He knew before he even climbed down. The gate was open. He always closed it. Always. Rebecca noticed his expression. "What is it?" Ethan did not answer immediately. He stepped onto the ground and walked toward the gate. The wood was scratched near the latch. Fresh marks, not from weather, not from cattle. Someone had been there. Rebecca climbed down more slowly. "Ethan," he turned. "Stay behind me." Her face tightened. "Not with fear, with frustration. I am not helpless. I know." His voice was calm. "But I need to know you are safe." For a moment she looked like she wanted to argue. Then she saw his eyes, not commanding, not controlling, just asking. She nodded once. "All right." And somehow that simple agreement meant more to Ethan than he expected. Inside the ranch house, everything appeared untouched. The chairs were where they had left them. The kitchen table still held the folded newspaper from that morning. The fireplace was cold, but Ethan moved carefully through every room. He checked the back door, the windows, the storage room. Nothing, no one. Rebecca stood near the kitchen, holding the locked case against her side. "You think they were here?" "Yes. How do you know?" Ethan looked toward the hallway, because a man who wants something does not usually walk away without taking it. Rebecca looked down at the case. They were looking for this. Ethan nodded. The truth sat between them. Harold Whitaker was no longer just a name on a document. He was a man who had reached into their lives, and he was getting closer. The next morning, Ethan barely touched his breakfast, Rebecca noticed. "You have been staring at that window for 10 minutes. Ethan looked away. "I am thinking. You do that often." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Think? Stand somewhere quiet and look like the mountains personally offended you." For a second, Ethan almost smiled. Almost. Then his expression returned to seriousness, Rebecca noticed. "You should smile more." "I do smile." "No." She took a sip of coffee. "You almost smile. There is a difference." The comment caught him off guard. A small breath escaped him, not quite a laugh, but close. Rebecca saw it, and she smiled. It was a small moment, simple. But Ethan realized he had not heard someone laugh in his kitchen in a very long time. Around midday, a rider appeared on the trail. Ethan saw him before Rebecca did. He stepped outside. The man stopped near the fence. "Ethan Walker?" "Yes." The rider removed his hat. "Name's Caleb Dunn." Ethan studied him. "What do you want?" Caleb looked uncomfortable. "I was told to deliver a message." "From who?" The man hesitated, then reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. "Harold Whitaker." Ethan did not move. Caleb placed it on the fence post. "That is all I was asked to do." Then he turned his horse around. Before leaving, he looked back. "Mr. Walker?" Ethan watched him. "Whatever this is, you should know Whitaker does not usually offer second chances." Then he rode away. Rebecca opened the letter with Ethan standing beside her. The handwriting was neat, almost polite. That made it worse. "Mrs. Miller, I believe there has been a misunderstanding regarding your late husband's papers. Some matters are better handled privately than dragged through unnecessary trouble. Return what belongs to me, and no further inconvenience will come to you or those assisting you." Harold Whitaker. Rebecca read it twice, then she folded the paper. "He thinks he can scare me." Ethan looked at her. "You are scared." She was quiet, then she answered honestly, "Yes." That surprised him, because Rebecca had always seemed unshaken. But then she continued, "I am scared because I know what he is willing to do." She looked toward the window. "But being afraid does not mean I will give him what he wants." Ethan said nothing. He had spent years believing courage meant never feeling fear. Rebecca reminded him it meant something else. That evening, Ethan visited Daniel and Mary Cooper. The Cooper ranch sat a few miles away, surrounded by open pasture and tall grass. Daniel listened quietly as Ethan explained everything. Mary looked toward Rebecca, who sat near the fire with a blanket around her shoulders. "She needs a place with more people around," Mary said. Ethan frowned. "You think I cannot protect her?" Mary looked at him. "That is not what I said." She poured more coffee into his cup. "You are thinking like a man guarding a fence line." Ethan remained silent. Mary continued, "But this woman does not need a wall around her. She needs people beside her." That stayed with him, because deep down, Ethan knew she was right. Later that night, Ethan returned home. Rebecca was sitting on the porch. The stars were bright above the mountains. "You talked to the Coopers." It was not a question. Ethan sat beside her. "Yes. And Mary thinks you should stay there for a while." Rebecca looked down. "And you agree?" A long silence. Finally, Ethan said, "I think it would be safer." She nodded slowly. "I knew you would say that." He looked at her. "What does that mean?" Rebecca turned toward him. "It means every time something gets difficult, you try to carry it alone." Ethan looked away. "That is not true." "It is." Her voice was gentle. "You carried your grief alone. You built this ranch alone. You decided being alone was the only way to survive." The words landed harder than he expected, because they were true. Rebecca looked toward the mountains. "I do not want you standing between me and danger, because you think you have to." A pause. "I want you standing there because you choose to." Ethan looked at her, and for the first time, he understood the difference. The next morning came too quickly. Rebecca packed a small bag, not because she wanted to leave, because she understood the danger. Ethan loaded supplies into the wagon. Neither of them spoke much, then Rebecca stopped. "Ethan," he turned. She held something in her hand, a small wooden carving, the toy he kept on the shelf. She had noticed it missing from the house. "You left this in the guest room." Ethan took it. His fingers closed around the worn wood. "That belonged to Lily." Rebecca lowered her eyes. "I am sorry." He nodded. After a moment, he placed the toy back into his pocket. Then he looked at her. "Thank you." Two simple words, but Rebecca heard everything behind them. Before they could leave, a sound came from the ridge. A horse, then another. Ethan turned. 3 riders stood above the ranch, watching, waiting. The wind moved through the valley. Rebecca stepped closer. Ethan did not tell her to hide. He did not tell her to run. He simply moved beside her. The riders began coming down the trail, and at the front was a man Ethan had never met. But Rebecca knew immediately who he was. Harold Whitaker, the man who had taken everything from others, the man who now believed he could take her future too. He stopped near the fence, looked at Ethan, then at Rebecca, and smiled. "Mr. Walker," he said, "I believe we need to have a conversation." Harold Whitaker said it calmly, almost kindly. That was the first thing Ethan noticed. Men like Whitaker did not need to raise their voices. They had spent years learning that power was often quieter than anger. Ethan stood beside the ranch fence, one hand resting on the weathered wood. Behind him, Rebecca remained still. She did not hide. She did not step away. But Ethan noticed her fingers tighten slightly around the edge of her coat. A small movement, one most people would have missed. Ethan did not. Whitaker removed his gloves and looked around the ranch. "I have heard a great deal about this place." Ethan said nothing. Whitaker smiled. "Beautiful land, good cattle. A man could build a comfortable life here. That what you came to discuss?" Whitaker looked back at him. "No." A pause. "I came because I believe we have both been put in an unfortunate position." Rebecca stepped forward. "My husband's papers are not yours." Whitaker's eyes moved toward her. There was no anger in his expression. That made it worse. "Mrs. Miller." His voice carried the same false politeness. "You have been through a great deal. I understand that grief can make people hold on to things that feel important." Rebecca stared at him. "You mean evidence?" Smile faded slightly. "I mean trouble." The wind moved through the trees. Nobody spoke. Then Ethan stepped forward. "She is not giving you anything." Whitaker looked at him. "Mr. Walker." A quiet laugh escaped him. "You misunderstand your position." Ethan's expression did not change. "Do I?" Whitaker glanced around. 3 men stood behind him, all watching, all waiting. "I know you are a practical man," Whitaker continued. "You have spent years keeping your head down, taking care of your cattle, avoiding other people's problems." His eyes moved toward Rebecca. "Then this woman arrives, and suddenly you are risking everything." Ethan remained silent. Whitaker lowered his voice. "You do not know her." Rebecca looked at Ethan, not because she needed an answer, because she wanted to know what he would choose. For years, Ethan had chosen distance, silence, a quiet life without anything left to lose, but that man was not standing there anymore. "I know enough," Ethan said. Whitaker studied him. "Enough to lose your ranch?" A pause. "Your reputation?" Another pause. "Your peace?" Ethan looked toward the mountains, the same mountains that had taken his family, the same mountains where he had found Rebecca. Then he looked back. Some things are worth losing peace for. For the first time, Whitaker's expression changed. Not much, just enough. He had expected fear. He found something else. Whitaker stayed for only a few more minutes. He did not threaten, not openly. He did not need to. Before leaving, he placed his gloves back on. "Think carefully, Mr. Walker." He looked toward Rebecca. "People who stand in the way of powerful men often discover they are standing alone." Then he mounted his horse. The riders followed him down the trail. Ethan watched until they disappeared. Only then did he breathe. Rebecca stood beside him. "You were afraid?" Ethan looked at her. Yes, the answer surprised her. "You were?" He nodded. "I would be a fool not to be." She looked toward the road. "Then why did you stay?" Ethan did not answer right away, because the truth was harder to say than he expected. Finally, he said, because I know what it feels like when everyone walks away. Rebecca looked at him, and she understood. That night they did not sleep. The ranch felt different. Every sound seemed louder, the creaking of the porch boards, the wind against the windows, the horses shifting in the barn. Ethan checked the locks twice, Rebecca noticed. You think they will come back? Yes, when, I do not know. She sat at the kitchen table, the locked case in front of her. The lamp beside her cast a soft circle of light across the papers. You should go to the Coopers tomorrow, Ethan looked at her. You agree? I do not like it. A small pause, but I know Mary is right. He sat across from her. Rebecca, she looked up. This is not your fight alone anymore. The words stopped him, because that was exactly what she had told him before. Only now he was hearing them differently. For years, Ethan had carried grief like a duty. Like putting it down would mean forgetting. But Rebecca had shown him something. Letting someone stand beside you did not erase the past. It honored the fact that you were still alive. Before sunrise, Ethan prepared the wagon. The plan was simple. Rebecca would stay at the Cooper Ranch while Samuel Carter finished preparing the case against Whitaker. Ethan would remain nearby, close enough if she needed him. Far enough that Whitaker could not easily use her as a target. Rebecca walked outside carrying a small bag. The morning air was sharp. You packed too much. She looked at him. I am carrying a child, not moving across the country. A faint smile crossed his face. You have a habit of being prepared. So do you, he looked at her. I do. You keep extra fence posts, extra tools, extra blankets. She stepped closer. You pretend you do not care, but you spend your whole life making sure everyone else has what they need. Ethan looked away. Rebecca noticed. She always noticed. You do that when something is true. What? Look away. For a moment they stood there quietly. Then Ethan reached for the wagon handle. Rebecca saw his hand pause, like he wanted to say something, but he did not. Not yet. The Cooper Ranch was only a short ride away. Mary welcomed Rebecca immediately. Daniel helped unload her things. Everything looked ordinary, safe, but Ethan could not shake the feeling that ordinary was something they had lost. Before he left, Rebecca stopped him near the fence. Ethan, he turned. She hesitated. A rare thing for her. Be careful. 2 simple words, but the way she said them carried more. He nodded. You too. Then he rode away. Rebecca watched until he disappeared beyond the trees. Only then did she realize how quiet the ranch felt without him. That evening, Ethan returned to his own ranch. The sun was setting. The house was empty again. But it did not feel the same, because now he knew what empty truly meant. He stepped inside. On the table was a small folded piece of paper. His heart tightened. He reached for it. But it was not from Whitaker. It was from Samuel Carter. The message was short. Meet me before dawn. I found the final witness. Ethan read it twice. Then he looked toward the window. For the first time in years, he felt something he had almost forgotten. Hope. But hope came with a price, because somewhere beyond the mountains, Harold Whitaker was not waiting quietly. And by morning, Ethan would learn just how far the man was willing to go. The first light of dawn had barely touched the San Juan peaks when Ethan reached Samuel Carter's office. The town was still waking. A few shopkeepers lifted wooden shutters from their storefronts. The smell of fresh bread drifted from the bakery near the main road. A stable boy carried buckets of water past the courthouse. It looked like an ordinary morning, but Ethan knew better. Nothing about this case was ordinary anymore. Samuel Carter was already inside. A stack of papers sat on the desk. Beside them was an old man with a gray beard and tired eyes. Ethan stopped in the doorway. Carter looked up. Ethan, he stepped aside. This is Benjamin Ross. The name meant nothing to Ethan at first. Then he saw Rebecca's reaction. She had arrived moments later with Mary Cooper. The moment Rebecca saw the man sitting there, she stopped. Not because she recognized him, because she realized what he represented. Another piece of the truth her husband died trying to reveal. Benjamin stood slowly. Mrs. Miller, Rebecca stared at him. You knew my husband. Benjamin lowered his eyes. Yes. The room became quiet. Too quiet. Rebecca's hand moved toward the small leather bag she carried. Not because she needed the documents, because she needed something solid to hold on to. Why did you disappear? Benjamin took a breath. Because I was afraid. The honesty surprised everyone, he continued. Thomas found records showing Whitaker was changing land claims before they were filed. But he was not working alone. Samuel placed another document on the table. He had people inside the records office. Rebecca looked at the paper. My husband knew? Benjamin nodded. He knew enough to understand the danger. Her voice became softer. Then why didn't he tell me? Benjamin looked at her. Because he loved you. The words landed harder than any accusation. He believed if you knew everything, you would try to help him. Rebecca looked away because she knew it was true. Thomas had always protected her, even when she was angry at him for doing so. For the next several hours, Samuel Carter organized the evidence: names, dates, property records, witness statements. Every piece connected. Whitaker had built his fortune by taking advantage of people who had no one powerful enough to defend them. Small ranchers, families settling new land, people who trusted official papers because they had no reason not to. Rebecca sat quietly as Carter explained each document. She listened carefully. She asked questions. She corrected small details. And slowly, Ethan noticed something. She was not the frightened woman who had arrived on the mountain trail. She was the woman Thomas Miller had trusted. The woman who had carried his work through storms, broken roads, and fear. Later that afternoon, Samuel closed the folder. We have enough to move forward. Rebecca looked at him. Enough to stop him? Carter nodded. If we do this correctly. If, Carter sighed. Men like Whitaker do not build their power by following rules. Ethan looked toward the window. The street outside was busy, people walking, horses passing, children laughing, a normal world continuing around a battle most people could not see. What happens now? Ethan asked. Carter looked at him. Now we keep Rebecca safe. Rebecca immediately shook her head. No. Everyone turned. She looked at them. I am going with you. Mary stepped closer. Rebecca. No. Her voice remained calm. But I am done hiding. Ethan watched her, not with surprise, with respect. Because he finally understood. Rebecca was never asking someone to fight for her. She was asking for the chance to stand beside them. That evening, the four of them returned to the Cooper Ranch. The sunset painted the fields gold. Mary prepared supper. Daniel repaired a broken wagon wheel near the barn. For a brief moment, life felt normal. Rebecca sat on the porch while Ethan stood near the fence. You are thinking too loudly, he looked over. I am standing here, yes. She smiled slightly. But somehow you make silence noticeable. A small smile touched his face, then disappeared. Rebecca noticed. You are worried. Yes, about tomorrow? Looked at the mountains, about every day after tomorrow. She was quiet. Then she walked closer. Ethan. He looked at her. You saved me on that trail. He shook his head. I gave you a ride. No. Her voice softened. You gave me a choice. That stopped him. Rebecca continued. You could have kept riding. The wind moved through the grass. You could have decided I was someone else's problem. Ethan looked down. But you stopped. For years, Ethan had believed that moment was about helping a stranger. Now he wondered if maybe he had stopped, because some part of him had been waiting for a reason to return to life. The next morning, Samuel Carter prepared to travel to the courthouse. The case was ready, the witnesses were ready. But before they left, a rider arrived. Not one of Whitaker's men, a messenger from town. He carried a sealed letter. Samuel opened it. His expression changed. "What is it?" Ethan asked. Samuel handed him the paper. The letter was from Harold Whitaker, not a threat, not an apology, an announcement. Whitaker had arranged a public hearing before the official trial. He wanted to convince the town that Rebecca was lying, that Thomas had misunderstood, that the entire investigation was built on the words of a grieving widow. Rebecca read the letter, then folded it carefully. "He wants me to speak." Samuel nodded. "Yes," Ethan looked at her. "You do not have to." Rebecca met his eyes. For a moment, neither moved. Then she said, "I know," a pause, "but I want to." The courthouse was crowded. People came from nearby ranches and settlements. Some were curious, some were doubtful. Some simply wanted to see what would happen when a wealthy man finally had to answer questions. Harold Whitaker stood near the front. Perfect coat, calm expression, the same confidence he always carried. When Rebecca entered, conversation started. Quiet whispers, judging looks, people who only knew part of the story. Ethan walked beside her, not in front, not behind, beside, Rebecca noticed. And that mattered. The hearing began. Whitaker's attorney spoke first. He painted a picture of confusion, a widow overwhelmed by grief, a woman who misunderstood business records, a woman who wanted revenge. Rebecca listened. She did not react. She simply waited. Then Samuel Carter called her forward. The room became silent. Rebecca stepped toward the witness table. Her hand rested briefly on the old documents, the same documents she had carried across Colorado, the same documents that had nearly cost her everything. She looked at the people watching her. Then she began to speak. Not loudly, not dramatically, just clearly. She explained what Thomas discovered. She explained the records, the letters, the names, the dates. Every question they asked, she answered. Every attempt to make her seem weak only gave her another chance to show how carefully she had carried the truth. Across the room, Ethan watched. The woman everyone underestimated was no longer defending herself. She was telling the story exactly as it happened. And nobody could make her smaller anymore. By the end of the hearing, even Whitaker had stopped smiling, because he had finally realized something. He could threaten a person, he could pressure them, he could make them afraid, but he could not erase the truth once someone was brave enough to speak it. As the crowd slowly left the courthouse, Rebecca stepped outside. The mountain air was cold, clean. She looked at Ethan. Neither spoke at first. Then he said quietly, "You were remarkable." She shook her head. "No." A small smile appeared. "I was just tired of being silent." Ethan looked at her, and for the first time, he saw not the woman he had rescued, but the woman who had changed him. Still, as they stood there beneath the fading afternoon sky, neither of them noticed the man watching from across the street. Harold Whitaker had lost the room, but he had not lost the fight, and he was already planning what came next. Harold Whitaker had always believed that fear was the strongest tool a man could use. Money could open doors, influence could silence people. A respected name could make others doubt what they had seen with their own eyes. But Rebecca Miller had stood in front of the entire town and spoken calmly. She had not begged. She had not broken. And that was the one thing Harold Whitaker could not understand. How could someone who had lost so much still stand so firmly? How could a woman carrying grief and uncertainty become the person who finally brought his carefully built world down? The answer was simple. She had stopped fighting alone. The days after the hearing moved quickly. Samuel Carter worked through the final legal steps. Benjamin Ross gave his testimony. The records were examined. The names of families who had lost land because of false claims were brought forward one by one. For the first time in years, people who had felt powerless began to believe they might actually be heard. Harold Whitaker's influence began to disappear, not all at once, not like a storm, more like a fence slowly falling apart after years of neglect. One post, then another, until the thing that once looked unbreakable was standing on nothing. But Ethan did not pay much attention to Whitaker anymore. His thoughts were somewhere else, at the Cooper Ranch, with Rebecca. The morning Rebecca went into labor arrived quietly, almost too quietly. The sky was clear, the mountains stood bright beneath the early sunlight. Ethan had spent the morning repairing a section of fence near the barn when Daniel Cooper came riding quickly from the house. Ethan looked up immediately. "What happened?" Daniel jumped down from his horse. "Mary says it is time." For a moment Ethan did not move. The hammer in his hand lowered slowly. Daniel nodded. "Yes, Ethan," that was all he needed to hear. He dropped everything and ran toward the house, not because he was afraid of what was happening, because he was afraid of how much he cared. Inside the Cooper home, everything was moving. Mary was calm. She had helped bring many children into the world across the Colorado Territory. She gave instructions clearly: warm water, clean cloth, more blankets. Rebecca sat on the bed, holding onto the edge of the blanket. When Ethan appeared at the doorway, she looked up. For a second, surprise crossed her face. "You came." He almost looked offended. "Of course I came." A faint smile touched her lips. "You looked like you might run away." "I do not run." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "You rode across half the territory alone. That is different." "Is it?" Even then, even in the middle of everything, she found a way to challenge him. And somehow, Ethan found comfort in that. Because Rebecca was still Rebecca. Hours passed. The house became quiet outside the room. Daniel sat near the kitchen table. The fire burned low. The old clock on the wall moved slowly. Ethan stood in the hallway. He had faced storms, danger, men who wanted him afraid. None of it compared to waiting. Waiting gave a person too much time to think. He looked down at his hands, hands that had repaired fences, hands that had worked cattle, hands that had buried the people he loved. For years, those hands had only known how to hold on. Now they were waiting to hold something new. Near sunset, Mary finally opened the door. Ethan looked up immediately. She smiled. "It is a girl." For a moment, Ethan could not speak. Then Mary stepped aside. Rebecca was resting against the pillows, tired, pale, but smiling, and in her arms was the smallest person Ethan had ever seen. He walked closer slowly, almost carefully, as if one wrong movement might break the moment. Rebecca looked at him. "You want to hold her?" Ethan swallowed. "Yes." The answer came quietly. Rebecca placed the baby in his arms, and the moment he felt that tiny hand move against his finger, something inside him changed, not disappeared, changed. For years, he had believed that loving again would somehow betray the family he lost. But standing there holding Rebecca's child, he understood something he had never allowed himself to believe. The heart did not replace. It expanded. The love he had for Clara and Lily was still there. It always would be. But it did not mean there was no room left for tomorrow. Rebecca watched him. She saw the way he looked at the child. Not with sadness, not only with memories, with wonder. "You are smiling." Ethan looked down. "I am not." She gave him a tired smile. "You are." He looked at her, and this time, he did not look away. "You were right." "About what?" "That being alone was not easier." Rebecca became quiet, because she knew how difficult those words were for him to say. Ethan looked toward the baby. "I spent years thinking losing people meant I should stop caring," his voice lowered. "But maybe losing them is exactly why we should care more." Rebecca reached out and touched his hand, a small gesture, nothing dramatic, But Ethan felt it, the same way he had felt every small kindness she had given him since the mountain trail. A few weeks later, the official news arrived. Harold Whitaker had been convicted. The stolen land claims were returned. Families who had nearly lost everything were given another chance. Benjamin Ross settled nearby, helping Samuel Carter finish the remaining records. The valley slowly began to heal, but for Ethan and Rebecca, life became something much simpler. Morning coffee, the sound of horses in the barn, a baby crying in the night, laundry drying in the mountain wind. Small things, ordinary things, the kind of things Ethan once thought he would never have again. One evening, Ethan stood outside the ranch house. The sun was lowering behind the peaks. Rebecca stepped onto the porch holding their child. "You are thinking again." Ethan smiled slightly. "Apparently, I do that." She walked beside him. "What about?" He looked at this valley. "When you first arrived here, you were trying to get somewhere else." Rebecca nodded. "I was, and now?" She looked toward the ranch, the fields, the mountains, the home they had built. "I think I already arrived." Ethan was quiet, because he knew exactly what she meant. This place was not where she had been forced to stay. It was where she chose to remain, and that difference mattered. Later that night, Rebecca found a letter among Thomas's belongings. It had been folded carefully. Her name was written on the front. She recognized his handwriting immediately. She opened it slowly. Inside were not instructions, not warnings, not another secret about Whitaker. Only a message: "Rebecca, if you are reading this, then life has taken a road I hoped you would never have to walk alone. But if there is one thing I know, it is this. You have always been stronger than the world allowed you to believe. Do not let grief convince you that your story has ended. Some roads only appear when we think we have lost our way. Live. Love, and do not be afraid of the happiness that finds you." Rebecca read the words twice, then she folded the letter carefully. Not with sadness, with peace. Months later, the ranch looked different. Not because the land had changed, because the people living there had. The old empty bedroom was no longer untouched. The kitchen had become louder, the second chair at the table was no longer empty, and Ethan Walker, the man who once believed solitude was the safest place in the world, now found himself standing outside every evening, waiting for the sound of Rebecca's footsteps. The mountain trail where he had found her had once been a place of uncertainty. A broken wagon, a storm, a stranger. But it had also been the beginning of something neither of them expected. And soon, Ethan would finally say the words he had been carrying since the day he stopped on that road. Not because Rebecca needed saving, but because he had finally found someone he wanted to walk beside. For Ethan Walker, those words took years to understand. He had spent most of his life believing survival was the same thing as living. Wake before sunrise. Check the cattle, repair what was broken, keep moving, keep the memories at a safe distance. It had worked for a long time, until one cold evening on a mountain trail, when he found a woman beside a broken wagon and made a choice that changed everything. He could have kept riding, he almost did, but he stopped. And now, months later, he stood outside the same ranch house, watching the morning sun spill across the valley, while Rebecca walked toward him carrying their daughter. The mountains looked the same. The fences needed repairs. The cattle still wandered toward the creek whenever they found a loose section. Life was still full of ordinary problems. But Ethan no longer saw ordinary things as something to escape. He saw them as something worth protecting. Spring had finally reached the San Juan Mountains. The snow that had covered the higher trails began to disappear. Small patches of green pushed through the earth. The ranch came alive again. Daniel Cooper often joked that Ethan's place no longer looked like the home of a man hiding from the world. "It looks like someone actually lives here now," Daniel said one afternoon while helping repair the barn roof. Ethan handed him a piece of wood. Someone does, Daniel smiled. That would have been a strange answer a year ago. Ethan looked toward the house. Through the open window, he could hear Rebecca singing softly to the baby. Not a performance, not something meant for anyone else. Just a quiet song filling a room that had once held only silence. Daniel followed his gaze. You know, I never thought I would see the day. What day? The day Ethan Walker stopped looking like he was waiting for something bad to happen. Ethan looked down at the board in his hands. For once, he did not argue. Rebecca received the letter from Thomas's family near the beginning of summer. It arrived with the afternoon mail, a simple envelope, nothing unusual. But when Rebecca saw the handwriting, she knew immediately who it was from. She sat at the kitchen table after opening it. Ethan noticed her expression when he walked inside. What is it? She looked up. My husband's family wants me to return east. He remained quiet. Rebecca unfolded the letter. They say there is a place for me there, a house. Help with the baby. Ethan nodded slowly. That is good. The answer came too quickly. Rebecca looked at him. Good? He realized what he had said. He stopped. Because he knew what was happening. The old Ethan was trying to appear reasonable, practical, safe, the man who pushed people away before they had the chance to leave. Rebecca placed the letter on the table. You think I should go? No to a pause. I think you should choose. That answer mattered. Because this time Ethan was not making the choice for her. He was not deciding what was best. He was giving her the freedom he had always respected. Rebecca studied him. You really mean that? Yes. She looked around the kitchen, the small table, the shelves she had organized, the coffee cup she always used sitting beside his. This place was never a rescue. Ethan looked at her. No, it was a choice. He nodded. And that was the difference. A few days later, Ethan took Rebecca riding, not far, just along the old trail where the mountains opened into a wide valley, the same trail where they had first met. The wagon tracks from that day were long gone, the broken wheel, the scattered belongings, the fear. All of it belonged to another time. Rebecca stopped her horse near the overlook. You know what is strange? What? When I was stuck here, I thought this was the worst moment of my life. Ethan looked at her. And now? She looked down at the valley. Now I think it was the moment my life finally turned around. The wind moved gently through the grass. Ethan remembered that night, the storm, the woman who refused to give up, the stranger who somehow felt familiar. You scared me that day, Rebecca smiled. I was the one stranded. I know, then why were you scared? Ethan looked toward the mountains, because I knew if I stopped, I might care. Rebecca became quiet, because she understood what he meant. Caring had always been the dangerous part, not the storm, not Whitaker, not the unknown. Caring meant there was something to lose, and yet, somehow, it also meant there was something to live for. That evening, Ethan prepared something Rebecca did not expect. He cleaned the front porch, fixed the loose railing, even replaced the old chair beside the doorway. Rebecca watched from inside. You are working very hard for someone who claims he does not like surprises. Ethan turned. I do not. She looked at the porch. Then what is this? He glanced away. I needed to fix the railing. Rebecca smiled. You fixed that last week. A quiet silence followed. Then Ethan walked toward her. In his hand was a small wooden box. Rebecca looked at it. Ethan, he stopped in front of her. For perhaps the first time in his life, the words he wanted to say did not come easily, not because he did not know them, because they mattered. Rebecca Miller. She looked at him. When I found you on that mountain trail, I thought I was helping someone who needed a way home. He opened the box. Inside was a simple ring, not flashy, not meant to impress anyone, just honest, but you were never someone who needed saving. Rebecca's eyes softened. You reminded me that a man can lose everything and still have something left to give. The mountains were quiet around them. The ranch, the fields, the home they had built, all of it waited. I do not want you here because you have nowhere else to go. He took a breath. I want you here because this is where we choose to be. Rebecca looked at the ring, then at him. You are asking me, yes, for real? A small smile crossed his face, for real. For a moment she said nothing, then she stepped closer. Yes, the answer was quiet. But Ethan heard it, and for the first time in many years, he allowed himself to believe something good could stay. They married in the fall, not in a grand ceremony, not with wealthy guests or elaborate decorations, just family, friends, the people who had stood beside them when things were difficult. Mary Cooper cried before the vows were even finished. Daniel pretended he had something in his eye. Samuel Carter arrived from Denver with news that the final land disputes had been settled, and Rebecca stood beside Ethan wearing a simple dress, holding their daughter in her arms before handing her to Mary. When Ethan took her hand, he did not feel like a man beginning a new life. He felt like a man finally accepting the one he had been given. Years later, people in the valley still talked about the mountain trail. Some remembered it as the place where a widow's wagon broke down. Some remembered it as the place where a cowboy stopped when he could have kept riding. But Ethan and Rebecca remembered something different. They remembered that sometimes the hardest roads lead people exactly where they belong. The wilderness that once left Rebecca stranded became the place where she found a home. The ranch that once held only silence became filled with laughter, and the man who believed his story had already ended discovered something he never expected. A second chance does not always arrive like a miracle. Sometimes it arrives as a broken wagon, a storm, a stranger, and one small decision to stop. Because the ride home was never the end, it was only the beginning. And maybe if you had been standing there on that lonely mountain trail, with the cold wind cutting through your coat and the road ahead offering no easy answers, you would have wondered the same thing Rebecca wondered. Would anyone stop? Would anyone see past the broken wagon, the tired face, and the struggles you carried quietly inside? Rebecca and Ethan's story reminds us that sometimes the greatest moments in life do not arrive when everything is perfect. Sometimes they come when we are worn down, when we have lost something precious, and when we are simply trying to take one more step forward. If you were Ethan, would you have stopped for a stranger in the storm? If you were Rebecca, would you have trusted someone enough to accept a helping hand? Share your thoughts in the comments. I would love to hear what you would have done, because a true home is not always the place where we begin. Sometimes it is the place where someone chooses to stand beside us. If stories of love, healing, courage, and second chances speak to your heart, consider subscribing. There are many more unforgettable journeys, hidden mysteries, and emotional frontier stories waiting for you in the videos ahead.